The Black Hawk touched down at FOB Sentinel with the kind of hard landing that told you the pilots wanted to be somewhere else. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes grabbed her rifle case and rucksack, stepping off into the Afghan dust that seemed to coat everything within seconds of arrival. The forward operating base sprawled across a plateau ringed by mountains, a collection of tents and hardened structures that housed 300 personnel supporting operations throughout the valley. She had her orders folded in her breast pocket. Sniper support attachment, temporary duty, 30 days minimum. The assignment had come through JSOC channels with specific language about her qualifications and expected role. After 4 deployments and a marksmanship record that had earned her a quiet reputation in certain circles, this should have been straightforward. The command tent sat at the center of the base, distinguished by the antenna array sprouting from its roof and the 2 armed guards flanking its entrance. Reyes approached with her orders in hand, noting the way the guards looked past her toward the helicopter still spinning down on the pad. She was used to that look. 5'6", 130 pounds, her uniform hanging on a frame built more for distance running than the Hollywood version of a soldier. People saw what they expected to see. Inside the tent, Colonel Richard Hargrove sat behind a desk that seemed too large for the space, maps covering every surface not occupied by communication equipment. He was a thick man with a red face that suggested either high blood pressure or a permanent state of irritation. When he looked up at Reyes, his expression suggested the latter. She saluted and handed over her orders. Colonel Hargrove, I am Staff Sergeant Reyes reporting as directed for sniper support attachment. He took the papers without returning the salute, scanning them with the kind of quick dismissal that meant he had already made up his mind. His eyes flicked to her, then back to the orders, then to her again. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, he laughed. It was not a kind sound. Sniper support. He tossed the orders onto his desk. Let me tell you something, Staff Sergeant. I have SEAL teams operating in these mountains. Delta operators running missions I cannot even discuss in this tent. You know what I do not have? I do not have time to babysit every National Guard weekend warrior that Personnel Command decides to send my way. Sir, my qualifications are listed in those orders. 3 combat deployments, advanced sniper school, competition record at the national level. I am here to support operations as directed. Hargrove leaned back in his chair, that smile still fixed on his face like something painted there. I have read your qualifications, Staff Sergeant. Very impressive on paper. But this is not a shooting range in Alabama. This is a combat theater where real operators do real work. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. What I need is someone to maintain our training range and provide basic instruction to personnel who need qualification refreshers. That is what you will do. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your state or your country in the comments below and let me know if your area has any military bases nearby. I'm always curious where this community comes from and whether you have seen the kind of dismissal that Elena was about to experience firsthand. Sir, Reyes said, keeping her voice level, my orders specifically designate me for operational sniper support. Range maintenance is not within the scope of my assignment. Your orders, Hargrove said, are suggestions that I can interpret according to the needs of my command. And my command needs someone to babysit the range. He walked back behind his desk, already looking at other papers, dismissing her with his posture. Sergeant Peters will show you to your quarters and brief you on range responsibilities. Dismissed. She stood there for a moment longer, weighing her options. Push back and she risked immediate transfer or worse. Accept, and she would spend 30 days organizing ammunition and watching personnel shoot at paper targets. Neither option sat well, but only one kept her on the base where operations were happening. Sir, she said finally. Understood. Outside the tent, a young sergeant waited with the expression of someone who had been told to handle something unpleasant. He introduced himself as Peters and led her across the base toward the perimeter, past the motor pool and the mess tent and the communication center, all the way to a small shed that sat adjacent to what was clearly the shooting range. This is you, Peters said, gesturing at the shed. Range office and quarters. The colonel wants the range operational by 0600 tomorrow. Targets need replacing, ammunition inventory needs updating, and there's a list of personnel due for qualification inside. Reyes looked at the shed, then at the range stretching out toward the distant mountains. The firing positions were adequate, the target area standard, the overall setup functional, if uninspired. She had worked with worse. She spent the next hour unpacking her gear in the cramped space that would serve as both office and sleeping quarters. Her rifle case went under the cot, her personal equipment organized with the precision of long habit. Through the small window, she could see the helicopter pad where another Black Hawk was landing, this one bearing passengers who moved with the deliberate confidence of Special Operations personnel. SEAL Team Bravo had arrived at FOB Sentinel. She watched them unload, 7 operators moving as a unit, even when simply walking across a landing pad. Their gear was pristine, their weapons customized, their bearing unmistakable. They were everything the military wanted to project about its elite forces, and they knew it. Reyes turned away from the window and finished organizing her space. Tomorrow she would be running a qualification range, while those men prepared for operations she had been specifically sent here to support. The irony was not lost on her, but irony did not change circumstances. What changed circumstances was opportunity. And opportunities, she had learned across 4 deployments and more combat than her official record would suggest, had a way of presenting themselves to those patient enough to wait. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Davis had been running SEAL teams for 6 years, and he could feel when someone was watching him. The sensation prickled at the back of his neck as he settled into the prone position on the FOB shooting range, his SR-25 rifle extending before him toward targets set at 400 meters. He took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot broke clean, but the impact landed 2 inches left of center. He frowned, adjusted, fired again. Still left. The rifle had been shooting true for months, and now it was pulling like something had shifted in transit. He rolled to his side and looked back toward the range tower. The woman was there, the one Hargrove had mentioned in passing during his arrival briefing. Range instructor, National Guard, temporary attachment. She stood in the tower doorway with a clipboard in her hands, but her eyes were on him, not on the targets. On him. Davis pushed himself up and walked toward the tower, leaving his rifle on the shooting mat. His spotter, Petty Officer First Class Chun, watched him go, but said nothing. The team had learned when their commander wanted company and when he wanted space. "Something I can help you with," Davis said as he reached the base of the tower. His tone carried the edge that usually made junior personnel find somewhere else to be. The woman did not flinch. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read, something between patience and what might have been amusement. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," she said, "I run this range. I know who you are. What I want to know is why you are staring at me instead of doing whatever it is range instructors do." She tilted her head slightly, considering him in a way that felt like evaluation. "Your scope mount," she said. "Third screw from the front. It is loose by about a quarter turn. Probably happened during transport. That is why you are pulling left." Davis felt his jaw tighten. He had been shooting since before this woman had probably enlisted, had qualified expert on every weapon system the Navy threw at him, had made shots in combat that would have been impossible for most trained snipers. And this range babysitter was going to tell him about his equipment. "I think I know my own rifle, Staff Sergeant." She nodded, that same unreadable expression still in place. "I'm sure you do, sir. Just thought you might want to check it before your qualification scores go into the record." She glanced down at her clipboard. "You are scheduled for recertification at 1400. Colonel Hargrove likes his paperwork current." Davis stared at her for a long moment, waiting for her to look away, to show some sign of intimidation. She did not. She simply stood there with her clipboard, a woman half his size who ran a shooting range and apparently thought she knew more about his weapon than he did. He turned and walked back to his shooting position without another word. That evening, Chen found him in the team quarters, cleaning his rifle with more attention than usual. The spotter had been with Davis for 2 deployments, long enough to know when something was bothering the commander. She might not be wrong. Chen said quietly, settling onto his rack across the small space. About the scope mount. Davis did not look up. She is a range instructor, Chen. National Guard. Probably never fired a shot outside a qualification lane. Chen shrugged. I'll look her up. She has some interesting entries in her service record. Redacted sections, which usually means something. Everyone has redacted sections these days. Davis set down his cleaning rod and picked up a small wrench, the kind used for scope adjustments. It does not mean anything. He waited until Chen left for the mess tent before he checked them out. The third screw from the front was loose by exactly a quarter turn. He tightened it, verified the zero, and said nothing to anyone about it. The mission briefing came at 2200, held in the command tent with Hargrove presiding and representatives from every element involved in the extraction. Davis and his team occupied one corner, their attention focused on the maps and imagery spread across the central table. The target was a high-value informant in a mountain village 18 kilometers northeast of the FOB. Local assets had arranged the meeting, but the extraction window was narrow. Helicopter insertion at 0300, link up with the asset by 0400, extraction before dawn brought visibility and vulnerability. Hargrove walked them through the operational details with the confidence of a man who had commanded dozens of similar missions. When he reached the support element section, he listed air assets, quick reaction force availability, and communication protocols. He did not mention sniper support. Davis noticed the omission. Sir, what about Overwatch? We are moving through a valley with significant elevation on both sides. Sniper support would give us eyes on potential ambush positions. Hargrove waved a hand dismissively. Our snipers are committed to other operations. You will have air support on standby and QRF if things go sideways. Standard protocol. Sir, Davis pressed, this terrain is exactly where we would want dedicated marksman coverage. Do we have any assets available? What we have, Hargrove said with an edge entering his voice, is a range instructor who thinks she belongs in the field. And what we're not going to do is send National Guard weekend warriors into an operational environment because someone thinks we need extra coverage. Your team is more than capable of handling this extraction, Lieutenant Commander. Unless you're telling me otherwise. Davis recognized the challenge in the words. No, sir. Team Bravo is ready. The briefing concluded 30 minutes later, and the team moved to their staging area to prepare equipment and run through contingencies. Davis found himself glancing toward the range tower as they crossed the base. A single light burned in the small window, and he could see a silhouette moving inside. He thought about the scope mount, about the quarter turn that had been exactly right, about the redacted sections in a service record that Chen had noticed. Then he pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the mission ahead. At 0245, the Blackhawks spooled up on the pad, their rotors cutting the darkness into rhythmic waves of sound and pressure. Team Bravo loaded in sequence, each operator taking their position with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this hundreds of times. As the helicopter lifted off, Davis looked down at the FOB, shrinking below them. The range tower was visible for a moment, that single light still burning, and then it was gone as they banked northeast toward the mountains. In the tower, Reyes watched the helicopters disappear into the darkness. She had heard the briefing through the thin walls of the adjacent supply tent, had heard Hargrove dismiss the idea of sniper support, had heard Davis advocate for coverage that would not come. She turned back to her equipment, laid out on the small table that served as her workspace. Her personal rifle sat in its case, cleaned and zeroed. Her range cards for the surrounding terrain were complete, distances calculated to every significant elevation point within 2,000 meters of the base. Her ammunition was sorted and counted. She had been sent here to support operations. The fact that no one wanted that support did not change what she was prepared to do. Reyes settled in her chair and turned up the volume on the tactical radio that technically she was not supposed to have access to. Then she waited. The village materialized out of the darkness exactly where the maps said it would be, a cluster of mud brick structures clinging to a mountainside that had probably looked the same for 1,000 years. Davis led his team through the narrow streets with weapons up and senses straining, but the only movement came from a dog that watched them pass with yellow eyes before slinking into an alley. The informant was waiting in a courtyard behind the third building from the eastern edge, a thin man in his 50s with a gray beard and hands that would not stop moving. He spoke rapid Pashto to their interpreter, his eyes constantly checking the rooftops and doorways around them. He says there are Taliban in the mountains, the interpreter relayed. More than usual. They have been gathering for 3 days. Davis felt the familiar cold settle into his stomach, the instinct that had kept him alive through missions that should have killed him twice over. Ask him how many. The exchange took longer than it should have, the informant's voice rising and falling with what sounded like fear. The interpreter turned back with a face that had gone pale in the moonlight. He says at least 40, maybe more. They know about the extraction route. Davis keyed his radio immediately. Sentinel Base, this is Bravo Actual. We have intelligence indicating significant enemy presence along extraction route, requesting alternate egress options. Hargrove's voice came back through static and distance. Bravo Actual, negative on alternate routes. Air assets are committed elsewhere. Proceed with plan extraction. QRF is on standby if needed. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Davis looked at his team, at the informant who had risked everything to help them, at the mountains rising black against the sky, just beginning to lighten in the east. They had maybe 90 minutes until full daylight made them visible to anyone with eyes and a rifle. We move now, he said. Standard formation. Stay tight. They loaded into the 2 vehicles that had been cached outside the village, armored trucks that offered some protection, but not enough against a determined ambush. Davis took the lead vehicle with Chun and 2 others. The remaining 3 operators rode in the trail vehicle with the informant between them. The road wound down through a valley that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated convoys. Steep walls rose on both sides, broken by ravines and rock formations that could hide 100 fighters. The only way through was forward, and forward felt like walking into a trap that had already been sprung. They made it 3 kilometers before the world exploded. The RPG came from the left ridgeline, a streak of fire that crossed the darkness and slammed into the lead vehicle's engine block. The truck lurched sideways, momentum carrying it another 20 meters before it ground to a halt with smoke pouring from under the hood. Davis was already moving, shouting orders as he threw open his door and rolled into the ditch beside the road. Contact left, he yelled. Chun, get the 50 up. But before Chun could reach the mounted gun, fire erupted from the right ridgeline as well. Then from directly ahead, where the road curved between 2 massive boulders. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like a deadly light show, rounds snapping through the air and pinging off the disabled vehicle's armor. Davis pressed himself into the rocky ground and tried to count the sources of fire. At least 15 positions on the left ridge. Another 10 or 12 on the right. More ahead, blocking any advance. They were boxed in on 3 sides with a cliff face behind them. Bravo 2, he called to the trail vehicle. Status. Kowalski's voice came back tight with controlled fear. 2 wounded. Vehicles still mobile, but we cannot push through that blocking position. The informant. Is he hit? Negative. He is down and covered. Small mercy. Davis rolled onto his side and keyed the air support frequency. Warhammer. Warhammer. This is Bravo Actual. Troops in contact. Grid reference follows. He rattled off the coordinates from memory, his voice steady despite the rounds kicking up dirt 3 feet from his head. Requesting immediate air support. The response took longer than it should have. Bravo Actual, Warhammer copies. Be advised, closest available air asset is 45 minutes out. Repeat, 45 minutes. 45 minutes. In an ambush, 45 seconds could be a lifetime. 45 minutes was an eternity they might not have. Davis switched frequencies. Sentinel Base, Bravo Actual. We are pinned down and taking effective fire from 3 directions. Requesting immediate QRF deployment. Hargrove's voice again, and Davis thought he heard something almost like satisfaction in it. Bravo Actual, QRF is spinning up. Estimate 30 minutes to your position. 30 minutes. Still an eternity, but better than 45. Davis did the math in his head, calculating ammunition expenditure against time. They had maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire before things got critical. After that, they would be throwing rocks. Chen appeared beside him, blood running from a cut on his forehead where something had grazed him. Machine gun position on the left ridge, he said, is the one chewing us up. If we do not take it out, we are not going to make 30 minutes. Davis looked through his scope at the position Chen indicated. The gun was set up perfectly, with clear lines of fire down into the valley and rock cover that would stop anything short of a direct hit. Taking it out would require either an airstrike they did not have or a sniper shot from an angle they could not reach. We hold, he said. Conserve ammunition. Keep their heads down and wait for QRF. Even as he said it, he knew the math did not work. The enemy was advancing, using fire and movement to close the distance while their machine gun kept the SEALs pinned. Every minute brought them closer, and every minute burned through ammunition they could not replace. Peterson took a round through the shoulder, crying out once before clamping his jaw shut and continuing to fire with his offhand. Martinez reported the trail vehicle's rear tire had been shot out. The informant was praying in Arabic, his voice barely audible beneath the constant crack of gunfire. Davis fired at a shape moving between rocks, saw it drop, then saw two more take its place. They were running out of time, running out of options, and the help they needed was still 25 minutes away. He thought about Hargrove, dismissing the request for sniper support, about the valley terrain he had specifically mentioned, about the woman in the range tower who had known more about his rifle than he wanted to admit. None of that mattered now. What mattered was keeping his team alive long enough for help to arrive. If it arrived in time, the machine gun opened up again, and Davis pressed his face into the dirt as rounds stitched the air above his head. Somewhere on the ridgeline, enemy fighters were massing for what looked like a flanking maneuver. His team was bleeding, pinned, and running out of time. And then, impossibly, the machine gun went silent. Reyes heard the first contact report come through the tactical radio at 0342. The voice belonged to Davis, clipped and professional despite the gunfire audible in the background. She was on her feet before he finished transmitting, her hand already reaching for her rifle case. The follow-up transmissions painted a picture that worsened by the minute. Ambush from 3 directions. 2 wounded. Machine gun position with effective fire. Air support 45 minutes out. QRF 30 minutes. The math was simple and brutal. Team Bravo was going to take casualties they could not afford before help arrived. She ran across the base toward the command tent, her boots pounding the packed earth in rhythm with her heartbeat. The guards at the entrance tried to stop her, but she pushed past them with an urgency that brooked no delay. Inside, Hargrove stood over the communication console, listening to the same transmissions she had been monitoring. "Colonel," she said, not waiting for permission to speak, "I can reach an overwatch position on the eastern ridge within 20 minutes. I have line of sight to that valley from 1,200 meters. I can provide sniper support until QRF arrives." Hargrove turned to look at her, and his expression shifted from surprise to something harder. "Staff Sergeant, you are not authorized to be in this command center." "Sir, there are men dying out there. I'm a qualified sniper with 4 combat deployments. Let me help them." He stepped toward her, using his height and bulk to emphasize the distance between their ranks. "What you are is a range instructor who has overstepped her authority by accessing tactical communications. What you are not is an operational asset in this theater. I have already told you that." Reyes felt something cold settle into her chest, the same feeling she had experienced in other moments when the gap between what should happen and what was happening became unbearable. "Sir, with respect, my orders from JSOC specifically authorize me for operational sniper support. You chose to reassign me to the range. That does not change my qualifications or my ability to help." Hargrove's face flushed red, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested she had crossed a line he did not intend to let her cross again. "Your orders are what I say they are on this base, Staff Sergeant. and I am saying you are not combat qualified for this theater. Now return to your range and stay off tactical frequencies before I have you confined to quarters." The radio crackled behind him. Another voice, one of the SEAL operators, reporting that the enemy was advancing. Ammunition status critical. The machine gun was still firing, still pinning them down, still killing them one round at a time. Reyes looked at Hargrove, at the man who would rather let soldiers die than admit he had been wrong about her. She had seen his type before, men who confused authority with competence and pride with leadership. Arguing would accomplish nothing. He had made his decision, and nothing she said would change it. "Understood, sir," she said. She turned and walked out of the command tent. But she did not walk back to the range. Instead, she moved along the base perimeter, staying in the shadows between structures, making her way toward the eastern edge where the wire separated the FOB from the mountains beyond. Her quarters were on the way, and she stopped only long enough to grab her rifle case, her pack with ammunition and range cards, and the ghillie suit she had brought despite knowing she was supposed to be running a shooting range. The eastern wire had a gap she had noticed on her first day, a section where the posts had shifted and created just enough space for someone her size to slip through. She had noted it as a security concern. Now she noted it as an opportunity. The ridge rose before her in the darkness, 1,000 meters of rocky slope that would take everything she had to climb quickly. She started moving, her rifle case strapped across her back, her breathing controlled despite the pace she set. Every minute she delayed was a minute Team Bravo did not have. The tactical radio in her ear continued to broadcast their situation. Enemy forces massing for assault. Wounded count now at 3. Ammunition critical across all positions. Davis's voice remained steady, but she could hear the strain beneath the professionalism, the sound of a man watching his team die by inches. She climbed faster. The terrain was brutal, loose rock and steep angles that threatened to send her sliding back down with every step. Her legs burned, and her lungs ached, but she had trained for this, had spent years building the endurance that separated a good shooter from a combat sniper. The rifle on her back was not just a weapon. It was a promise she intended to keep. Halfway up, she paused long enough to check her position against the terrain features she had memorized from her range cards. The valley where Team Bravo was pinned lay to the northeast, visible as a dark gash between the mountains. From her current position, she could see muzzle flashes winking like malevolent stars. From the top of the ridge, she would have clear sight lines to the enemy positions. 1,300 meters, maybe 1,400 depending on exact placement. Long range, but not impossible. Not for her. She resumed climbing, pushing through the pain and the doubt and the knowledge that what she was doing would end her career if Hargrove had his way. Court-martial for disobeying a direct order. Dishonorable discharge. Everything she had built over 12 years in uniform. Gone because she could not stand by while good men died. The choice had been easier than she expected. The ridge crest appeared above her, a jagged line against a sky that was beginning to show the first hints of gray. Dawn was coming, and with it visibility that would make the enemy's job easier and Team Bravo's situation worse. She had maybe 30 minutes before full light. Reyes pulled herself over the final rocks and immediately began setting up her position. The ghillie suit went on first, breaking up her outline against the terrain. Then the rifle, her personal M24 that she had carried through 3 deployments and trusted more than she trusted most people. She settled into the prone position, adjusting her body until she found a natural point of aim that would let her shoot without fighting the rifle. Through her scope, the valley snapped into focus. She could see the disabled vehicles, the SEAL operators taking cover behind them, the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions on the ridgelines. And there, on the left ridge, the machine gun that was systematically destroying Team Bravo. She began her calculations. Range, 1,387 meters. Wind, left to right at maybe 8 miles per hour. Temperature, cold enough to affect ballistics. Elevation, shooting downhill, which would change her hold. She dialed the adjustments into her scope, rechecked her math, and settled her crosshairs on the machine gunner. One shot to change everything. One shot that no one had authorized, no one had requested, no one believed she could make. Reyes exhaled half a breath and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and 1,387 meters away, the machine gunner's head snapped back. He crumpled over his weapon without a sound that could reach her. But through the scope, she watched his body slide sideways off the rocks where he had been positioned. The gun went silent. Reyes worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round with the smooth motion of 10,000 repetitions. She was already scanning for the next target before the brass from her first shot finished bouncing off the rocks beside her. The loader reacted faster than she expected, scrambling toward the abandoned machine gun with the instinct of a fighter who understood that the weapon mattered more than the man who had been firing it. He grabbed the handles and swung the barrel back toward the valley, searching for targets he could punish for his comrade's death. He never found them. Her second shot took him through the chest, and he collapsed across the gun in a position that would make it difficult for anyone else to use without moving his body first. 2 down. The machine gun neutralized. She allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction before pushing the emotion aside and returning to her scope. The enemy fighters on the left ridgeline had frozen, their fire slackening as they tried to understand what had just happened. She could see them looking at each other, looking at the silent machine gun position, looking in every direction except the one that mattered. They were searching the valley floor, assuming the shots had come from the SEALs they had pinned down. They had no idea death was watching them from a ridge they had not thought to secure. She selected her third target, a man with an RPG launcher who was positioning himself for a shot at the disabled vehicles below. The range was slightly shorter, 1,290 meters, and she adjusted her holdover accordingly. The trigger broke clean, and the man with the RPG pitched forward, his weapon clattering down the rocks without him. Now the enemy knew something was wrong. She could see the confusion spreading through their positions like a virus, fighters abandoning their firing points to seek better cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into individual survival instincts. They still did not know where the shots were coming from, but they knew that staying exposed meant dying. Reyes shifted her position slightly, moving behind a different rock to change her silhouette against the lightning sky. The ghillie suit made her nearly invisible against the terrain, but nearly was not the same as completely, and a careful observer might spot her muzzle flash if she fired from the same position too many times. Her fourth shot caught a fighter who had decided to run, dropping him mid-stride as he sprinted between 2 boulders. Her fifth went through the shoulder of a man, trying to drag a wounded comrade to cover, spinning him around before he fell. She felt nothing as she watched him go down. There would be time for feeling later, if there was a later. Right now, there was only the work. The right ridgeline was starting to react now. Fighters there realizing that their comrades across the valley were dying from an unknown threat. Some of them began repositioning, trying to identify the source of the fire that was systematically dismantling their ambush. Others increased their rate of fire toward the SEALs, desperate to finish the mission before whatever was killing their friends turned its attention to them. Reyes obliged them. She swung her rifle toward the right ridge and began the calculations again. 1,412 meters. Wind unchanged. Elevation slightly different due to the angle. She dialed the adjustments and found a target, a man with a radio who seemed to be coordinating the fighters around him. Leadership targets changed battles. She had learned that in her second deployment, watching an insurgent cell fall apart after their commander took a round through the throat. Remove the brain, and the body stopped functioning with purpose. The radio operator dropped, and the fighters around him scattered like startled birds. She tracked one of them for 3 seconds before sending a round through his back as he fled. Another turned to look at where his leader had fallen, and she punched a hole through his chest before he could process what he was seeing. 8 confirmed. The count mattered for the after-action report, but more importantly, it mattered for the tactical situation. 8 fewer enemies meant 8 fewer guns pointed at Team Bravo, 8 fewer threats that the SEALs had to survive for the next 20 minutes until QRF arrived. She scanned the valley floor and saw movement among the American positions. The SEALs were taking advantage of the chaos, repositioning their wounded to better cover, consolidating their ammunition, preparing to fight their way out if the opportunity presented itself. They did not know who was helping them, but they knew enough to exploit the help while it lasted. The blocking position ahead of the convoy remained the strongest enemy element. Fighters dug into rocks that provided excellent cover from the valley floor. But from her elevated position, Reyes could see angles they thought were protected. She found a gap in their defenses, a space between two boulders where a fighter had positioned himself to cover the road. The shot was her longest yet, 1,463 meters with a crosswind that had picked up in the last few minutes. She did the math twice, adjusted her scope, and sent the round downrange with a prayer to whatever gods watched over soldiers. The fighter slumped forward, and she allowed herself a small nod of acknowledgement. 9 confirmed. Dawn was breaking fully now, pink light spilling over the eastern mountains and illuminating a valley that had become a killing ground. The enemy's ambush had failed, their coordinated assault shattered by a single shooter they could not find. But they were not beaten yet. She could see them regrouping, officers or sergeants, or whoever passed for leadership among them, trying to restore order and redirect the attack. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they figured out where she was. 10 minutes to do as much damage as possible before she became the hunted instead of the hunter. Reyes settled deeper into her position, controlled her breathing, and went back to work. Davis had been counting the seconds until his team died when a machine gun stopped firing. The silence hit him like a physical blow, so unexpected that for a moment he thought he had been shot and his brain was simply taking time to catch up with the damage. Then he heard Chen's voice, sharp with confusion. "The gunner's down." Someone dropped the gunner. Davis risked lifting his head above the rock that had become his entire world for the past 10 minutes. Through his scope, he could see the machine gun position on the left ridgeline, could see the body slumped over the weapon and another body crumpled beside it. 2 kills, precise and devastating, from a direction that made no sense. "Who has eyes on the shooter?" he called out. Negative came the response from Kowalski in the trail vehicle. Negative from Martinez. Negative from every member of his team who was still capable of responding. Another enemy fighter dropped, this one on the right ridgeline. Davis watched through his scope as the man simply collapsed. No warning, no visible impact, just their 1 second and gone the next. A heartbeat later, another one fell. Chen scrambled to his position, blood still drying on his forehead. "Commander, those shots are not coming from our position. Someone is shooting from elevation, from the east." Davis swung his scope toward the eastern ridge, the one behind them, the one that should have been empty. The terrain was broken and shadowed, impossible to read at this distance. But as he watched, he caught the faintest flicker of light. A muzzle flash, barely visible against the growing dawn, from a position that had to be over 1,000 meters from the valley floor. "That is impossible range," Chen said, but his voice carried doubt rather than certainty. Another enemy dropped, then another. Davis watched the ambush that had been killing his team begin to fall apart, fighters abandoning their positions and scrambling for cover they had not needed 30 seconds ago. The coordinated assault dissolved into chaos as men who had been hunters realized they had become prey. He keyed his radio. "Sentinel base, Bravo actual. Be advised, we are receiving sniper support from the eastern ridge. Request confirmation of friendly assets in that position." Hargrove's response came back immediately, and Davis could hear the anger beneath the official tone. "Bravo actual, negative on friendly assets, eastern ridge. Repeat, no friendly snipers deployed to your location. You must be misidentifying enemy fire. Sir, these shots are hitting enemy positions. We have visual confirmation of at least 6 hostiles down from a single shooter. Someone is out there helping us." A pause, longer than tactical communication should allow. Then Hargrove's voice again, tighter now. "Bravo actual, I say again, no friendly snipers were deployed. Continue to hold for QRF." Davis wanted to argue, wanted to demand an explanation for the help he was receiving that his own command refused to acknowledge. But another enemy fighter dropped, and he realized that the conversation could wait. Whatever was happening on that ridge, whoever was pulling that trigger, They were buying his team time that nothing else could have provided. "Move the wounded to the forward vehicle," he ordered. "Kowalski, can you push through the blocking position if we give you covering fire?" Kowalski's response was immediate. "The blocking position's falling apart, Commander. Half of them are dead or running. Give me 60 seconds and I can punch through." As if to punctuate his words, another fighter in the blocking position collapsed. Then another. The sniper on the ridge was systematically dismantling the enemy's defensive line, creating a gap that had not existed 5 minutes ago. Davis made the decision without hesitation. All elements prepare to push. Kowalski takes point, we follow. "Chun, keep eyes on that ridge and let me know if our guardian angel needs help." They moved with the desperate efficiency of men who had been given a second chance they had not expected. The wounded went into the functional vehicle first, Peterson biting down on a strap to keep from screaming as a shattered shoulder was jostled. Martinez took the wheel, his knuckles white on the steering column. The blocking position had been reduced to 3 fighters, and those 3 were more concerned with finding cover than maintaining their ambush. Davis put 2 of them down himself as the vehicles lurched forward, and the third fled into the rocks without looking back. Behind them, the enemy on the ridgelines tried to regroup. Shots cracked past the convoy, but the concentrated fire that had pinned them down was gone, replaced by scattered attempts from fighters who had lost their coordination and their nerve. The sniper on the eastern ridge continued to work, each shot another enemy removed from the equation. Davis counted the muzzle flashes as they drove. 14, 15, 16 shots fired from that impossible distance, and he had not seen a single miss. Whoever was on that ridge was not just good. They were operating at a level he had only seen in the most elite marksmen in the military. The valley opened up ahead of them, the terrain flattening into an area where the helicopters could land. Davis could hear the rotors now, the QRF finally arriving 23 minutes after his initial call. Black Hawks appeared over the ridgeline, door gunners already engaging the enemy positions with fire that sent fighters scrambling for deeper cover. "Bravo Actual, this is Warhammer Flight. We have you visual. LZ is clear for extraction." Davis allowed himself to breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. "Copy, Warhammer. Coming to you." As the vehicles reached the landing zone and his team began loading onto the helicopters, Davis turned to look back at the eastern ridge. The dawn had fully broken now, golden light washing over the mountains and valleys, but he could see nothing on that distant slope. No movement, no reflection, no sign that anyone had ever been there. But he knew what he had seen. He knew what that sniper had done. And he knew that somewhere in the chaos of this morning, someone had defied orders and saved his entire team. He intended to find out who. Reyes felt the rhythm of combat settle into her bones, the steady cadence of acquire, calculate, fire, repeat that she had learned across 4 deployments and 10,000 hours of training. Her world had narrowed to the circle of her scope, the weight of the trigger against her finger, and the enemies who kept appearing in her crosshairs. 10 confirmed. A fighter trying to set up a mortar position, his tube half assembled when her round found him. 11. His assistant, frozen with shock for the half second it took her to work the bolt and send another shot downrange. 12. A man with a radio, probably calling for reinforcements that would arrive too late to matter. The convoy was moving now. She could see it pushing through the gap she had created in the blocking position. The SEALs were going to make it. The realization brought a surge of something that might have been relief, but she pushed it down and kept working. The mission was not over until every friendly was clear and the enemy was broken beyond recovery. Movement on her left caught her attention, a flicker of motion that did not match the terrain. She swung her rifle and found 3 fighters working their way along a goat trail that wound up from the valley floor toward a ridge. They had figured it out. Maybe not her exact position, but close enough to be a problem. She had perhaps 4 minutes before they reached effective range. 4 minutes to finish what she had started. Reyes turned back to the valley and found her 13th target, a fighter who had taken cover behind a rock outcropping and was directing others with hand signals. Leadership again. She sent the round through a gap in his cover that he probably thought was too small to matter. He collapsed without finishing his last gesture. The three fighters on the goat trail were closer now. She could see them clearly, young men with AK-47s and the determined expressions of soldiers who believed they were about to kill the person who had been killing their friends. They moved with reasonable skill, using cover when it was available, but they were not prepared for what waited at the top of the ridge. 14. The lead fighter on the trail dropped at 600 meters with a shot that required almost no calculation compared to what she had been doing all morning. The other two dove for cover, suddenly understanding that the hunter they had been stalking was aware of their approach. One of them made the mistake of exposing his shoulder as he tried to find a better position. Reyes put a round through it, and his scream echoed off the rocks as he tumbled down the slope. 15 confirmed. 1 wounded and combat ineffective. The last fighter on the trail made a decision. She watched him through her scope as he weighed his options, looked at his dead companion, looked at his wounded friend sliding down the mountain, and then turned and began scrambling back down toward the valley. She let him go. He was no longer a threat, and her ammunition was not infinite. The convoy had reached the landing zone. She could see the helicopters descending, door gunners engaging targets on the ridge lines with fire that scattered the remaining enemy fighters like leaves in a storm. The SEALs were loading their wounded, moving with the urgency of men who knew that safety was seconds away instead of the eternity it had been 30 minutes ago. Reyes allowed herself to lower her rifle for the first time since she had reached the ridge. Her shoulder ached from the repeated recoil. Her eyes burned from the sustained focus through the scope. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade. 14 confirmed kills. 1 wounded. At ranges between 600 and 1,460 meters. In conditions that would have challenged any sniper in the world. She had done what she came to do. The helicopters lifted off, carrying Team Bravo to safety, and Reyes began the process of breaking down her position. The ghillie suit came off first, stuffed into her pack with practiced efficiency. The rifle was cleared and secured, the brass from her shots collected, because leaving evidence was sloppy tradecraft. She swept the area twice, making sure nothing remained that would identify who had been here or what they had done. The climb down was harder than the climb up. Her legs had stiffened during the hour she had spent in the prone position, and the adrenaline crash left her feeling hollow and slow. But she forced herself to move with purpose, knowing that every minute she spent on this ridge increased the chance that someone would find her. The gap in the wire was still there when she reached the FOB perimeter. She slipped through it as the morning sun cleared the mountains, walking back toward her quarters with the careful pace of someone who had nothing to hide. A few personnel glanced at her as she passed, but none of them seemed to register anything unusual about the range instructor making her way across the base. She reached her quarters and closed the door behind her. The rifle went back under her cot. The ghillie suit went back into its storage bag. Her uniform, dusty and sweat-stained from the climb, was replaced with a fresh set that showed no evidence of where she had been. By the time she heard the helicopters returning with Team Bravo, Reyes was sitting at her desk reviewing qualification records as if the morning had been no different than any other. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing had returned to normal. The only evidence of what she had done was recorded in the small notebook she kept in her breast pocket. 14 confirmed. Ranges and conditions noted. Date and time documented. The door to her quarters remained closed as the base erupted into activity around her. She could hear shouting, the sound of medical personnel rushing toward the landing pad, the buzz of a command structure trying to understand what had happened in the valley. None of it concerned her. She had done her job. What happened next was someone else's problem. At least, that was what she told herself as she sat alone in her quarters and waited for the consequences to find her. The helicopter touched down at FOB Sentinel, and Davis was moving before the skid settled. Medical personnel rushed past him toward the wounded, but he ignored them and walked straight for the command tent with a fury that made junior personnel step out of his path without being asked. Hargrove was waiting for him, standing behind his desk with an expression that mixed relief with something harder to read. Lieutenant Commander, good to see your team made it back. I understand the situation got complicated out there. Complicated. Davis stopped in front of the desk, close enough that Hargrove had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. Complicated is a flat tire, Colonel. What happened out there was an ambush that should have killed my entire team. We had enemies on 3 sides, a machine gun chewing us apart, and no support for 30 minutes. My men are alive because someone put a sniper on that eastern ridge. I want to know who. Hargrove's expression flickered, something passing behind his eyes too quickly to identify. I told you during the engagement, Lieutenant Commander. No friendly snipers were deployed to your position. Whatever you think you saw out there, it was not one of our assets. Davis felt his jaw tighten. I do not think I saw anything, Colonel. I watched 14 enemy fighters drop from precision rifle fire originating from the eastern ridge. I tracked the muzzle flashes myself. Whoever was up, there was shooting at ranges over 1,000 meters and did not miss once. That is not enemy fire. That is not friendly fire from my team. That is a sniper, and I want to know who authorized the deployment. No one authorized anything because no one was deployed. Hargrove's voice carried the weight of command authority, the tone that expected obedience without question. I suggest you focus on your after-action report and let me worry about operational matters on this base. The dismissal hung in the air between them. Davis had spent enough time around senior officers to recognize when he was being stonewalled, when the answers he wanted were being deliberately withheld. He also recognized that pushing further in this moment would accomplish nothing except damaging his own position. "Understood, sir," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I will have my report to you by 1800. He turned and walked out of the command tent, his mind already working through the possibilities. Someone had been on that ridge. Someone with skills that matched or exceeded any sniper he had ever worked with. And Hargrove either did not know who it was or was lying about it. Chun found him outside the medical tent, where Peterson was being prepped for evacuation to a larger facility. The spotter had a tablet in his hands, the kind used for accessing personnel records and operational databases. "Commander, I did some digging." Chun kept his voice low, mindful of the personnel moving around them. "The only sniper-qualified person on this base who is not deployed with one of the teams is the range instructor, Staff Sergeant Reyes." Davis remembered the woman in the tower, the one who had known about his scope mount before he did. The one Hargrove had dismissed as a weakened warrior unfit for operational deployment. "Where is she now?" Chun shrugged. "Range tower, I assume. That is where she has been every day since she arrived." They walked across the base together, past the motor pool and the mess tent and the communications center, following the same path Davis had taken 2 days ago when he had confronted a woman he thought had no business watching him shoot. The range tower came into view, its small window reflecting the morning sun, and Davis felt something shift in his understanding of what had happened. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open without knocking and found Reyes sitting at a small desk, a stack of qualification records in front of her, a pen in her hand. She looked up at his entrance with an expression that gave away nothing. "Staff Sergeant," Davis said. "Lieutenant Commander." She set down the pen, but did not stand. "Something I can help you with." He stepped into the cramped space, his eyes moving across the details that told the story she was not telling. The rifle case under the cot, slightly displaced from where it should be. The boots by the door, dusty in a way that did not match someone who had spent the morning indoors. The faint smell of gun oil and something else, something that smelled like the mountains. "Where were you this morning, Staff Sergeant?" "Here," she said, "running the range, reviewing qualification records. Same as every morning." Davis moved to the small window and looked out at the eastern ridge, visible in the distance as a dark line against the brightening sky. From here, the ridge looked impossibly far away. From here, the idea that someone could have climbed it in the dark, set up a position, and made 14 kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters seemed like fantasy. But he had seen those muzzle flashes. He had watched those enemy fighters fall. He turned back to Reyes and noticed the small notebook tucked into her breast pocket. The kind of notebook snipers use to record their shots, their ranges, their conditions, and kills. "What is in the notebook, Staff Sergeant?" She did not answer immediately. Her eyes met his, and in that moment Davis saw something that had not been there before. Not defiance, not fear, but a quiet acknowledgement that the game was over. Reyes reached into her pocket and withdrew the notebook. She held it out to him without a word. Davis took it and opened to the most recent page. The handwriting was small and precise, the entries detailed in a way that spoke of professional discipline. Date, time, location, range, conditions. 14 entries, each one documenting a shot that had saved his team. 14 confirmed, Reyes said quietly. Ranges between 600 and 1,463 meters. Wind variable, 8 to 12 miles per hour. Temperature, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Davis closed the notebook and looked at the woman sitting before him. She was still calm, still composed, still showing nothing that would betray the magnitude of what she had done. She had defied direct orders, left the base without authorization, engaged in combat operations she had been explicitly forbidden to participate in, and she had saved 7 lives in the process. Does Hargrove know? He asked. Reyes shook her head. He ordered me to stay on the range. I chose not to follow that order. The silence stretched between them, filled with implications neither of them needed to speak aloud. What she had done was a court-martial offense. What she had done was also the reason Davis and his team were still breathing. He tucked the notebook into his own pocket. We're going to have a longer conversation about this, Staff Sergeant. But right now, I need you to stay here and say nothing to anyone until I figure out how to handle what comes next. Reyes nodded once. Understood, sir. Davis turned and walked out of the range tower, the notebook weighing heavy against his chest. Behind him, Reyes picked up her pen and went back to reviewing qualification records, as if the morning had been no different than any other. Master Chief Thomas Webb had investigated enough incidents during his 26 years in the Navy to recognize when a story did not add up. The report from FOB Sentinel had arrived at JSOC headquarters with contradictions that practically begged for scrutiny. A SEAL team ambushed and nearly destroyed. 14 enemy fighters killed by an unidentified sniper. A base commander claiming no friendly assets were deployed. Someone was lying, and Webb intended to find out who. The helicopter deposited him at Sentinel 3 days after the ambush. Enough time for the immediate chaos to settle, but not enough for memories to fade or stories to solidify into rehearsed performances. He carried a tablet loaded with personnel files, operational orders, and the preliminary after-action reports that had triggered his investigation. Colonel Hargrove met him at the landing pad with the forced cordiality of a man who knew his decisions were about to be examined. Master Chief, welcome to Sentinel. I have arranged quarters for you and made my staff available for whatever you need. Webb shook his hand without warmth. I appreciate that, Colonel. I would like to start with the personnel files for everyone on this base with sniper qualifications. The request seemed to catch Hargrove off guard. Of course. I will have my adjutant pull those records immediately. No need, sir. I already have them. Webb held up his tablet. What I need is a quiet space to review them and access to the individuals involved. Hargrove's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Whatever you need, Master Chief. They gave him a corner of the intelligence section, a desk with a secure terminal and enough privacy to work without interruption. Webb settled in and began reading, starting with the file that had caught his attention during the flight from headquarters. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes, National Guard sniper, currently attached to FOB Sentinel for operational support. Her official record was impressive enough, with 4 deployments and qualification scores that ranked in the top percentile of military marksmen. But it was the classified sections that made Webb sit up straighter in his chair. 3 operations with units whose designations he recognized as Tier 1 assets. 2 commendations that referenced actions he could not read without additional clearance. A training record that included schools most soldiers did not know existed. This woman was not a weekend warrior playing at being a sniper. She was an operator who had been quietly building one of the most impressive marksmanship records in the military. Webb pulled up the original orders that had sent Reyes to Sentinel. The language was specific and unambiguous. Sniper support attachment, operational deployment authorized, direct support to special operations elements as required. Someone at JSOC had specifically chosen her for this assignment based on her qualifications and experience. He compared those orders to the duty roster Hargrove had submitted. Reyes was listed as range maintenance and instruction, a designation that bore no resemblance to what her orders had specified. Either there had been a miscommunication, or someone had deliberately reassigned a combat sniper to babysitting duties. Webb spent the next 4 hours interviewing members of Team Bravo. Each conversation added another piece to a picture that was becoming increasingly clear. Davis described the ambush in clinical detail, the desperation of their situation, the impossible shots from the eastern ridge that had turned certain death into survival. Chun provided technical analysis of the shooting, ranges, and conditions that would have challenged any sniper in the world. Kowalski and Martinez and the others all said the same thing. Someone had saved them, and that someone had been shooting from a position no friendly asset was supposed to occupy. The final interview was with Reyes herself. Webb found her in the range tower, exactly where Davis had said she would be, sitting at a small desk with qualification records spread before her, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," he said, closing the door behind him. "I am Master Chief Webb, JSOC. I am investigating the events of 3 days ago." She looked up at him with eyes that showed neither fear nor defiance. "I assumed someone would come eventually." Webb took the only other chair in the cramped space. "Tell me what happened." She told him. No embellishment, no justification, just a straightforward account of hearing the radio traffic, requesting permission to deploy, being denied, and making the choice to go anyway. She described the climb, the position, the shots, the ranges and conditions for each kill. She spoke like someone giving a technical briefing rather than confessing to a court-martial offense. When she finished, Webb sat in silence for a long moment. 14 confirmed kills. At those ranges. In those conditions. "Yes, Master Chief." He leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant, your orders from JSOC specifically authorized you for operational sniper support. Why were you running a shooting range instead of supporting operations?" Colonel Hargrove made a command decision. He felt my qualifications were better suited to range maintenance. Webb heard what she was not saying. "Did he give you a reason?" He said real snipers were with the teams. He said he did not need National Guard weekend warriors in his operational environment. The words hung in the air, confirming what Webb had suspected since he first read the contradictory reports. Hargrove had taken a qualified combat sniper, one specifically sent by JSOC for operational support, and buried her in a job that wasted everything she had to offer. And when that decision had nearly gotten a SEAL team killed, he had denied any knowledge of the asset that saved them. Webb stood up. "Stay on the base, Staff Sergeant. Do not discuss this conversation with anyone. I have more work to do before I file my report." "Understood, Master Chief." She paused. "For what it is worth, I would make the same choice again." He looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who had climbed a mountain in the dark to save men who had dismissed her, who had defied orders because following them would have meant letting good soldiers die. "I know you would," he said. "That is not necessarily a bad thing." Webb walked out of the range tower and headed for the command tent. He had one more interview to conduct, and this one was not going to be pleasant for anyone involved. Colonel Richard Hargrove had built his career on certainty. Certainty in his decisions, certainty in his authority, certainty that the way he saw the world was the way the world actually worked. That certainty began to crack when Master Chief Webb walked into his office with a tablet in his hand and an expression that promised nothing good. "Colonel, we need to discuss Staff Sergeant Reyes." Hargrove leaned back in his chair, summoning the commanding presence that had carried him through 22 years of service. "I have already told Lieutenant Commander Davis, and I will tell you the same thing. No friendly snipers were deployed to support that extraction. Whatever happened on that ridge, it was not sanctioned by this command." Webb set the tablet on the desk between them. "I have interviewed every member of Team Bravo. I have reviewed the tactical communications from that morning. I have examined Staff Sergeant Reyes' service record and the orders that sent her to this base. Would you like to revise your statement, Colonel?" The question was not really a question. Hargrove could hear the steel beneath the polite words. the tone of a man who already knew the answers and was offering one final chance to tell the truth. Master Chief, Staff Sergeant Reyes, is a range instructor assigned to maintenance duties. Her qualifications on paper do not translate to operational capability in a combat theater. I made a command decision about the appropriate use of her skills. Webb tapped the tablet, and the screen lit up with text Hargrove recognized as Reyes's service record. The classified sections were no longer redacted. 3 joint operations with Delta Force. 2 deployments in support of SEAL Team 6. Advanced training at facilities that most officers did not know existed. Competition scores that ranked her among the top 20 military marksmen in the country. This is who you assigned to clean your shooting range, Webb said. This is who you told was not combat qualified for your theater. Hargrove felt the first real tremor of doubt, but he pushed through it with the stubbornness that had defined his career. Service records can be embellished. Classified operations can be exaggerated. I assessed her capabilities based on my direct observation and made my decision accordingly. Your direct observation. Webb's voice remained level, but something dangerous moved behind his eyes. You observed her for less than 5 minutes before reassigning her. You never reviewed her qualifications in detail. You never consulted with JSOC about the specific language in her orders. You saw a female National Guard soldier and decided she did not belong in your operational environment. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Hargrove's face flushed, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. That is not what happened. I evaluated her fitness for duty based on the needs of my command. Then explain this. Webb tapped the tablet again, and a video began to play. Helmet camera footage from the ambush, shaky and chaotic but unmistakable. Hargrove watched as Team Bravo took fire from 3 directions, watched as the machine gun pinned them behind their disabled vehicles, watched as men he was responsible for protecting came within seconds of being overrun. Then he watched the machine gun go silent, watched enemy fighters begin to drop, watched the ambush fall apart as an unseen shooter systematically dismantled the enemy positions. 14 confirmed kills, Webb said as the video continued. Ranges between 600 and 1,460 meters. Conditions that would challenge any sniper in the world. Staff Sergeant Reyes did that after you explicitly denied her request to deploy. She saved 7 lives because she disobeyed your direct order. She committed insubordination. Hargrove grasped the word like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. She left this base without authorization and engaged in combat operations she was forbidden to participate in. That is a court-martial offense regardless of the outcome. Webb closed the tablet and fixed Hargrove with a stare that seemed to see through every defense he had ever built. You want to court-martial the woman who saved a SEAL team because she disobeyed an order that should never have been given. An order that contradicted her JSOC authorization. An order based on your personal bias rather than any legitimate operational assessment. Hargrove opened his mouth to respond, but Webb continued before he could speak. I pulled your command history, Colonel. Staff Sergeant Reyes is not the first qualified female soldier you have reassigned to duties below her capability. In the last 3 years, you have redirected 4 women with combat specialties to administrative or support roles. 3 of them filed complaints that were dismissed without investigation. 1 transferred out of the military entirely. The words fell into a silence that seemed to swallow everything. Hargrove felt his certainty crumbling, felt the foundation he had built his career on shifting beneath him like sand. JSOC is opening a formal review of your command decisions, Webb said. You will be relieved of duty pending the outcome of that review. I suggest you spend the time between now and then considering how you want to explain your actions to the investigating board. This is not over, Hargrove said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried 30 minutes ago. No, Webb agreed. It is not, but your part in it might be. He picked up the tablet and walked out of the office, leaving Hargrove alone with the wreckage of everything he had thought he knew about himself. The certainty that had defined his career was gone, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like doubt. He sat in silence as the afternoon light shifted across his desk, casting shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing minute. Somewhere on this base, a woman he had dismissed as unworthy was going about her duties, waiting for a judgment that would likely never come. And somewhere in the system he had served for 22 years, wheels were turning that would grind everything he had built into dust. Hargrove had always believed he was right. Now he was beginning to understand how much that belief had cost, and how little it would protect him from what came next. Davis found her on the range at dawn, 2 days after Webb had delivered his findings to JSOC headquarters. She was lying in the prone position, her rifle extended toward targets set at 800 meters, her breathing controlled and steady as she worked through a practice session that no one had asked her to complete. He watched her fire 3 rounds in quick succession, each one finding the center of its target with the precision he had witnessed from a valley floor while his team was dying around him. She was not showing off. She was simply doing what she had always done, maintaining the skills that had saved 7 lives because no one had told her to stop. "Staff Sergeant," he said when she paused to reload. Reyes rolled to her side and looked up at him. Her expression carried the same unreadable calm it had shown since the first day he met her. "Lieutenant Commander." Davis walked to the firing line and lowered himself to sit on the packed earth beside her position. The morning sun was just clearing the mountains, casting long shadows across the range and painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "I owe you an apology," he said. She did not respond immediately, just watched him with those steady eyes that seemed to measure everything and judge nothing. "When you told me about my scope mount, I dismissed you. When I saw your name on the range roster, I assumed you were exactly what Hargrove said you were. I did not look deeper. I did not ask questions. I let my assumptions override my judgment, and that was wrong." Reyes was quiet for a moment longer. Then she sat up, cradling her rifle across her lap with the casual familiarity of someone who had carried weapons for most of her adult life. "Your scope is holding 0 now," she said. Davis almost laughed. Of all the responses he had expected, that was not one of them. He shook his head, a small smile breaking through despite the weight of the conversation. "It is. Thank you for that." She nodded once, a gesture that seemed to close the subject of apologies and open space for something else. "What happens now?" Davis had been asking himself the same question since Webb departed for headquarters with his report and his recommendations. The answer had arrived that morning in a secure communication that was still burning in his pocket. "JSOC has completed their preliminary review," he said. "You have been cleared of any wrongdoing. The determination is that Hargrove's order was unlawful because it contradicted your JSOC authorization. You cannot be charged with insubordination for refusing to follow an order that should never have been given." Reyes absorbed this without visible reaction. "And Hargrove, relieved of command as of 0600 this morning. There will be a formal investigation into his assignment decisions, but the outcome is not really in doubt. His career is over." She looked out at the targets downrange, her expression thoughtful. "I did not want that. I just wanted to do my job." "I know." Davis reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "But there is something else. My after-action report has been filed with full attribution. Every member of Team Bravo has provided statements confirming that you saved our lives. That report will become part of your permanent record." He handed her the paper. She unfolded it and read the contents, her eyes moving across the words with the same precision she applied to everything else. It was an offer. Tier 1 assignment, Advanced Sniper Cadre, immediate transfer upon acceptance. The kind of position that most soldiers spent entire careers trying to reach and never achieved. "They want me to join a direct action unit," she said. "They want you to do what you have apparently been doing for years, just with proper recognition this time." Davis watched her face for some sign of how she felt about the offer. "You have earned this, Staff Sergeant, multiple times over from what I have seen in your record." Reyes folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her breast pocket, the same pocket where she kept the notebook that documented her kills. "I will need to think about it. Take the time you need. But for what it is worth, I hope you accept. The teams could use someone with your skills, and more importantly, they could use someone who understands that doing the right thing matters more than following orders that should never have been given." She looked at him then, and for the first time since he had known her, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than the professional distance she had maintained through every interaction. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. That means something." Davis stood up and brushed the dust from his uniform. There was a formation scheduled for 0800, a formal announcement of Harbrough's relief and the temporary command structure that would take his place. He needed to be there, needed to stand with his team as the base absorbed the news of what had happened and what would come next. "One more thing," he said before turning to leave. "Shin told me you knew about the scope mount because you watched me shooting for less than 30 seconds. How did you spot something that small from that distance?" Reyes picked up her rifle and settled back into the prone position, her eye finding the scope with practiced ease. "I pay attention," she said. "It is what snipers do." Davis walked back toward the main base as the sun continued to rise, leaving her alone on the range with her rifle and her targets and the offer that would change the trajectory of her career. Behind him, he heard the crack of her first shot, followed by two more in quick succession. All three hit Cinemass. He had not need to look to know. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes stood before a classroom of 12 students at the Advanced Sniper Training Facility in Fort Benning, Georgia. The room was sparse, functional, designed for learning rather than comfort. The students sat in rows of metal chairs, their attention fixed on the woman at the front who had been introduced as their lead instructor for the next 8 weeks. 3 of the 12 were women. Reyes let her gaze rest on them for a moment longer than the others. Not because they needed special attention, but because she remembered what it felt like to walk into a room and know that half the people in it had already decided you did not belong. "Welcome to Advanced Sniper Qualification," she said. "Some of you have heard stories about why I'm standing here instead of still deployed overseas. Some of those stories are probably true. What matters is not the stories. What matters is what you learn in this room and how you apply it when lives depend on your ability to make shots that most people think are impossible." She turned to the screen behind her and pulled up a topographical map that several of the students recognized. The terrain was Afghan, mountainous, with a valley cutting through the center like a wound in the earth. 6 months ago, a SEAL team was ambushed in this valley. They were pinned down by enemy fire from 3 directions, with a machine gun position that was systematically destroying their ability to fight back. Air support was 45 minutes away. Quick reaction force was 30 minutes out. They had maybe 15 minutes before they were overrun. The room was silent. Every student understood what those numbers meant. Reyes pointed to a ridge on the eastern edge of the map. "I set up here, 1,387 meters from the machine gun position. Wind was left to right at 8 miles per hour. Temperature was 41 degrees. Elevation differential was significant because I was shooting downhill into the valley." She clicked to the next slide, which showed ballistic calculations laid out in precise detail. The students leaned forward, absorbing information that would form the foundation of everything they learned in the coming weeks. The first shot took the machine gunner. The second took the loader. After that, it became a matter of target selection and ammunition management. 14 confirmed kills over the next 23 minutes, at ranges between 600 and 1,460 meters. One of the female students raised her hand. "Sergeant, how did you maintain accuracy at those ranges with variable wind conditions?" Reyes allowed herself a small smile. "That is exactly the right question. And that is exactly what we're going to spend the next 8 weeks learning." The technical portion of the class continued for another 2 hours, covering ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, and the psychological factors that separated adequate shooters from exceptional ones. Reyes taught the way she did everything else, with precision and patience and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than excellence. When the classroom session ended, she led the students to the live fire range where they would begin applying theory to practice. The facility stretched across a valley that had been specifically designed to simulate the kind of terrain where real engagements happened. Targets were set at distances ranging from 300 to 1,500 meters, and the wind flags along the course told a story of constantly shifting conditions. Reyes was demonstrating a prone position adjustment when she noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the range. Lieutenant Commander Davis had traded his combat gear for instructor khakis, but he carried himself with the same quiet authority she remembered from Afghanistan. She finished her demonstration and left the students to practice under the supervision of her assistant instructors. Davis met her halfway, his expression carrying something that looked like satisfaction. Staff Sergeant Reyes. He extended his hand. Or should I say Sergeant First Class now? I heard about the promotion. She shook his hand. News travels fast. Good news does. He looked past her at the students on the firing line, watching them settle into positions and begin their work. I have a request. My new team is standing up next month, and I have been given latitude to select our training pipeline. I want you to design our sniper qualification program. Reyes considered the offer. Designing a program for a Tier 1 team was not the same as teaching a general qualification course. It would require months of work, access to resources that most instructors never touched, and a level of trust that commanders did not extend lightly. Why me, she asked. Because you understand something that most people never learn. Davis's voice carried the weight of experience, of lessons learned in a valley where he had almost died. Following orders matters, but knowing when a mission matters more is what separates good soldiers from great ones. I want my team trained by someone who understands that difference. She looked back at her students, at the 3 women among them who were currently matching or exceeding their male counterparts on the firing line. 6 months ago, she had been cleaning a shooting range while a commander who should have known better dismissed her as unqualified. Now she was shaping the next generation of military snipers and being asked to train the best of the best. The policy changes had already begun filtering through the system. Assignment decisions were being reviewed. Qualification standards were being applied uniformly regardless of gender. The investigation into Hargrove had revealed patterns that extended far beyond a single base, and the institutional response had been swift and thorough. None of it would have happened if she had followed orders that morning in Afghanistan. None of it would have happened if she had accepted that someone else's limitations should define her capabilities. I will do it, she said. Send me the parameters, and I will have a preliminary design within 2 weeks. Davis nodded, something like respect settling into his expression. I will be in touch. He walked away, and Reyes returned to her students. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the range and painting the targets in shades of gold. She moved among the firing positions, offering corrections and encouragement, watching potential transform into capability one shot at a time. Before I let you go today, I want you to think about something. She gathered them at the end of the session, 12 faces looking up at her with the exhaustion and exhilaration that came from pushing past perceived limits. The shot that matters most is not always the one you are ordered to take. Sometimes it is the one you choose to take because you know is right. Your job is to be ready for both. The students filed out toward their barracks, talking among themselves about what they had learned and what tomorrow would bring. Reyes stayed behind, alone on the range as the light faded and the first stars began to appear. And I want to ask you something before we end this story. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you? Where they looked at who you were instead of what you could do? Drop a comment and tell me about it. I read every single one, and your stories remind me why these videos matter. She picked up her rifle and settled into the prone position one final time, finding the target at 1,200 meters through her scope. The wind had shifted, the light was fading, and the conditions were exactly wrong for a shot this difficult. She took the shot anyway, set her mass. Some things never changed, and some things changed everything.